All right, so we started talking about postmodernism last week, and we ended by looking at some of the postmodern influences, the way that postmodernism has influenced literature and history and science and theology. And then tonight, we wanted to talk about the critical response to postmodernism. Now, there are a couple of things we can acknowledge that postmodernism gets right. Like most belief systems and worldviews, there's, you're going to hit on something correct. You're not going to, bat 1,000 on getting it wrong every time, right? There's going to be a little bit of truth that creeps in there. So what are some things that postmodernism gets right? Well, their critique of naturalism as being too confident in human reason and the scientific method is true. Modernism isn't that great. You want to talk about a Christian worldview, modernism isn't exactly that. Modernity is largely atheistic naturalism and nihilism and existentialism. It's not necessarily good in and of itself. So postmodernism's critique of we rely too much on human reason and logic, we rely too much on a scientific method, we don't leave enough up to mystery, we're not humble enough to acknowledge that we can't know everything and fix every problem. That's a legitimate criticism. As Christians, we accept the fact that there's a certain givenness to our existence, that God gives us the world, God gives us life, God gives us His Word, and we accept those things, and we do it understanding that He is God and we are not. And there's a lot of things we don't understand, and a lot of things that we'll never know this side of eternity. So that's a good thing. Secondly, it's recognition that language can be used for power. We should suspect motives and agendas in what other people tell us. We do need to have kind of a skeptical eye as we read the news and listen to the news and understand when you hear what a politician is saying, we should be skeptical of that. We should be asking ourselves, okay, what's the agenda? What's the ulterior motive here? And we should also evaluate our own biases. Where am I biased? Where are my blind spots? What are my motives? Make sure that keep my motives, my heart in check. So these are things that are legitimate things that we need to keep in mind. So there are a couple of things there that postmodernism gets right. But of course, this idea of recognition that language can be used for power, it does begin to break down quickly, because if all discourse, and this is what postmodernism says, if all discourse is equally prejudiced, then isn't that discourse itself prejudice, right? Postmoderns will say all language is prejudice, that all language is just a ploy for power. Well, if that's true, then the language you're using to tell me that is also prejudice and a ploy for power. So it's that circular reasoning, and so that if you take that to its logical conclusion, it's just moral and intellectual anarchy. So the third thing that they get right is that social conditions through which we view the world can reveal our limited perspectives. But again, this has its limits, because if I'm only the product of the forces of society, then the view that I'm a product of the forces of society is itself a product of the forces of society, right? So it's a self-refuting argument. So a lot of postmodernism is like that. Because postmodernism is about language. It's about words. It's about the source of truth. It's about what we can know and can't know. But it is itself claiming to be truth in something we can know. So it automatically questions itself. Sort of, reminds me of the image of a snake eating its own tail. That's kind of what postmodernism is doing. So what does postmodernism get wrong? Lots of things. One is the rejection of all meta-narratives. Again, that is itself a meta-narrative, another self-contradiction. The idea that we have no access to reality, that there are no facts, that all we're doing is telling stories. Again, That's another self-referentially incoherent argument because it itself is a story, not a fact. It kind of reminds me of the Epimenides paradox. Anybody familiar with the Epimenides paradox? Epimenides was a Cretan. Okay, and Epimenides the Cretan says, all Cretans are liars. He's a Cretan. He says, all Cretans are liars. So he himself is a liar. But if he's a liar, then what he says about Cretans would be untrue, right? Which means that Cretans would then be truthful. But Epimenides is a Cretan, and therefore what he says has to be true, that all Cretans are liars, which means that Epimenides himself is a liar, and what he says is untrue. And it's a never-ending circle. It's a logical fallacy loop. For a Cretan to say all Cretans are liars, it's sort of like the argument, can God make a rock so big he can't lift it? Well, it's a nonsensical question. And so the statement, Epimenides, the Cretan says all Cretans are liars, is a self-refuting statement, and it makes no sense. That's what we have with postmodernism. It really is the Epimenides paradox. The deconstructive postmodern view that language is indeterminate. In other words, a text can be read in a number of ways, and every one of those ways is equally correct, even if they're contradictory. They are correct. That begs the question, how can we then understand their own proposition? Again, it's an unresolvable paradox. Using language to absolutely say that language cannot be used to say absolute things. To say that it's an absolute truth, there are no absolute truths. You can't refute or defend that statement because it's nonsense. And then fourth, the critique of the autonomy and sufficiency of human reason rests on the autonomy and the sufficiency of human reason. And that's what leads Nietzsche to doubt that he is the source of his own thoughts. Now think about that. Nietzsche said that he doubted whether he was the source of his own thoughts. Where did that doubt come from? His own thoughts, right? So again, we just end up in this endless loop of nonsense. So there are three possible outcomes to the postmodern movement. This is from Sokol. You remember the Sokol hoax where he wrote the nonsense article and had it published in the Science Journal? So he gives three possible outcomes to where we are right now in the middle of this postmodern moment that we're in. The first, he says, is that there will be a backlash that leads to either dogmatic mysticism or religious fundamentalism. In other words, the pendulum, he's saying, will swing so far to the extreme that we'll just become even more dogmatic in our religion or our mysticism or whatever our belief systems there. Secondly, he said, this is possible, that intellectuals will become reluctant to attempt any kind of thorough criticism of existing social order. I don't know about you, but I think we're there. I mean, we just through COVID, we've entered this place where doctors and scientists are afraid to even speak out about what has been commonly held beliefs in science about vaccines, about epidemiology, about the way immunity works. I mean, it's treatments that have been used for years and years and years and years because they're politically, incorrect to talk about those treatments. You've got doctors and scientists, they're just being quiet. Because if they speak out on the truth, they'll be ostracized. They'll be excluded. So we're there. I think, and of course, he made this prediction back in the 90s. I think we're there. Intellectuals, doctors, professors, historians, scientists are reluctant to criticize or to speak contrary to what the predominant narrative is. And I think that's exactly where we are. And then thirdly, he said a possibility is that a culture will emerge that is rationalistic without being dogmatic, open-minded without being frivolous, and politically progressive without being sectarian. And that he acknowledges that that's a hopeful dream that probably will never happen. So that's sort of his wish, his ideal wish of what he hopes will happen. I feel like that right now we're at number 2. And whether we stay there in this, where there's this chilling effect and people just are just going to be quiet and not say anything, or whether it's going to swing, the other direction. I just don't know where we are. But James Sire, just in conclusion, talk about postmodernism, he said, if our culture is to move toward a hopeful future, it will first have to move back to more realistic paths. Pick up from where we began to go wrong, take into account the valuable insights derived from what has happened since, and forge a more adequate worldview. In other words, he's saying we need to stop, turn around, go back to the exit we missed, and take the other road. That the path that we are on as a society right now, postmodernism, it will not end well. And I tend to agree with that. So, any thoughts or questions about postmodernism? This worldview is what you're hearing on the news every day. It's what you're hearing from politicians every day. Our vice president last week was at a university. She was talking to a class, and a student started talking about, we don't need to be spending money in Israel on this Iron Dome, their defense system, because it's just, we're just helping this apartheid state that's slaughtering Palestinians and committing all kinds of, human rights abuses and just all the stuff that isn't true. In the remotest sense, it isn't true. And Kamala Harris listened to that and said, I'm glad that you've spoken your truth. And we need to hear your truth. And democracy only works when everybody voices their ideas and opinions, and those have to be heard. So she didn't critique it. She didn't push back on it or deny it. She said, that's your truth. And I affirm your truth. That's postmodernism. The idea that there is not a true and a false, there is your truth and there is my truth. And all truths have to be affirmed. Yes. Yes, they have. More and more blatantly every day. So, just a couple of fun slides. There's the wrong way, the right way, and there's your way. Postmodern. It's our word. Don't use it. Don't try to define it. Above all, don't label us with it, even if we apply it to ourselves. Certainty. Of course I'm sure about something. I never question my own doubts. That's a very postmodern perspective. Whereas as Christians, we would say, doubt your doubts. Right? I mean, we all have doubts, but you're to doubt your doubts. You're to question your doubts. But postmodernism says, no, don't question your doubts, because you should doubt everything. You should try to deconstruct and tear down everything. So never, that you can be certain about that. Authority, everything other than my personal opinion is just someone else's personal opinion. There's a lot of that going around. So there is no authority. There is no authoritative truth. Speaking of truth, it's an adventure, not an axiom. A story still unfolding, not a tale already told. The journey is what counts, not the destination, right? And then again, faith is doubt. In postmodernism, faith is doubt. And this is another thing that you see with progressive Christianity, is you'll hear them talk about things like, and again, there's a little bit of truth to this, but they'll say, church should be a place where you can bring your doubts and your questions. To a degree, I would say that's true. But what they do is they celebrate the doubts and the questions. They don't try to alleviate them. Postmodern progressive preachers will talk about, asking good questions. To them, it's all about asking the question and letting the question linger. Let's let that question sit there. Because there's value in the uncertainty. There's value in the question. There's value in the doubt. They'll never try to give you a definitive answer. They'll never say, well, that's a good question. Let's see what the Bible says. Let's just say that's a good question. Let's sit with that. What does that even mean? But that's what they do. Faith is doubt in the postmodern mindset. All right. Anything else about postmodernism before we radically shift gears and travel to the other side of the planet? Any final thoughts?
Pastor David, one thing that's always intrigued me is the fact that people use words, obviously, and we use words, and other people might use the same word, but use a different definition of it, so that the definition becomes vague or what you want it to fit, and then it's hard to pin things down with people that use words that way.
You're exactly right. They will use a word and mean it in a totally different way than what you mean. Right. And just like in the whole debate around homosexuality and that sort of thing, love. You know, they say, love is love, and God is love. We should just love each other. Okay. Well, I don't disagree with any of that. But what do you mean by love? If by love you mean I'm going to just agree with everything you say and do and think that I'm just going to affirm all of your life choices, that's not love. If a parent treated their child that way, Johnny, whatever you choose to eat or wear or not wear to school today, or whatever, not doing your homework or running out into the middle of traffic to play in the road, I'm just going to affirm that because you're just being your genuine self. Defects would be knocking on your door, right? Because that's not love, that's neglect. Yet the left and the progressives want us to think that that's love when it comes to people who are transgender or gender confused or homosexual, that to truly love them is just to affirm their identity, is to affirm their lifestyle, it's to not judge, it's to celebrate what they're doing. To them, that is love. That's not love by any biblical definition whatsoever. So, all right, well, let us go to the other side of the planet. Whoops. Just a minute. I'll get on the right slide.
I have a statement.
Yeah.
I was at this little treatment and had a group of men that met on Tuesday evening. They said, bring some questions. And everybody brought a question, and they asked a question. I would give a biblical answer. They told me, said, John, so we're not looking for answers, we're just raising questions.
What's the point? What is the point? All right, so the Eastern worldview is vastly different from the West, even though its roots are just about as ancient as Western thought. But the two ways of thinking are practically from different planets. I mean, the way, the vocabulary we use, the different ways we think about reality, it's just vastly, vastly different, the Eastern mindset. And the West's obsession with Eastern religion and philosophy began back in the 1960s, really, as young people were looking for an alternative to the middle-class views and values of their parents, right? And this was prompted by the fallout of the Vietnam War and all of the just kind of a rejection of the Western philosophy and worldview and the technology, because all of that has just done nothing but lead to war and suffering. Young people are disillusioned by Western economics. They see inequity and oppression, and then they reject Western religion, namely Christianity, because it didn't stop any of this. So it must be a failed religion. So that's kind of was the thinking in the 60s. And of course, this was also fueled by the sexual revolution and the drugs and all that just kind of worked together. And Eastern religion was appealing because it was exotic, right? It was exotic and it was so different from Western ways of thinking. It de-emphasized doctrine. It focused on personal growth and inner peace. It presented itself as a simple life from a land of quiet, mystical gurus, meditating on mountaintops. One author described the appeal of Tibetan Buddhism in particular as offering insights into suffering, pursuit of self-betterment without any need for faith and a set of doctrines. and that anyone can become a Buddha or an awakened or an enlightened one. What Buddha means, awakened or enlightened one. And anybody can become a Buddha by their own effort. There's no need for so-called organized religion. It's a do-it-yourself kind of faith system. So that was the appeal of the Eastern way of thinking. So what we're going to look at tonight is called Eastern Pantheistic Monism. And a caveat, it's nearly impossible to really categorize and label Eastern religions in a uniform way, the way we might be able to do so with some of the Western worldviews that we've looked at, because the Eastern way of thinking is a multifaceted landscape of religion and philosophy and worldview with nearly limitless varieties. In the book, James Sire boils down the differences to give us this basic understanding of the most fundamentalist idea of Eastern thought, and that is called Eastern Pantheistic Monism. So this would be like the common ground foundation that your Hare Krishnas and your Hindus and your Buddhists and your Transcendentalism and all that kind of stuff comes out of this very similar worldview. And it's the root of basic mainline Hinduism, Transcendentalism, and Buddhism arose out of Hinduism, but it does have some key differences we'll talk about at the end. Now, what do we mean by pantheistic? Well, pantheism is the idea that God is one with the cosmos, that God and creation are one and the same. There's no difference. The monism is the notion that because there's only one being, there's only God, everything is God, and God is everything. And all other forms of reality are just modes or reflections of God. So monism, mono meaning one. There's only one being in all the universe, God. And God is the universe, and the universe is God. Now, as with the other worldviews we've examined, some of them, we've said that they don't really fit with our 8 categories very neatly. Eastern Pantheistic Monism certainly doesn't. It doesn't even accept some of the same categorizations and distinctions that we do. And so, and when we do, we can mean different things by the same words, kind of like what you were saying earlier. And while it seems like what we're talking about is Eastern religions, and we'll talk about Buddhism and Hinduism, this is so much more than just a religion. It really is a worldview, and within that worldview are different religious beliefs that are very different. Even Buddhism. If somebody tells you they're a Buddhist, that really tells you nothing about what they believe. Buddhists can believe just about anything and be Buddhists. And so you have about as many different Buddhist beliefs as you have Buddhists. Just like you have about, as many opinions, in a Baptist business meeting as you have Baptists in the business meeting, right? We all just have our different opinions and ideas. So let's just think about this the best we can. So what does this say about prime and external reality and humanity? Atman is Brahman. Atman is Brahman. Let's just let that sit out there for a little while. Let them sit. That means the soul of each and every human being is the soul of the cosmos. Atman is Brahman comes from the Hindu Upanishads, and it's as foundational to Hinduism as in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth are to Jews and Christians. So this is like, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. To Jews, that's what Atman is Brahman is to Hindus. It's a basic statement of faith. And, as Christians, our worldview has a sharp distinction between the creator and the creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So the heavens and the earth are separate and distinct from God who created them. Hinduism says, no, it's all one and the same. So the word Atman means the essence or soul of any person is the Atman. Okay? So we are part of the Atman because we have souls, right? There's an essence. And Brahman is the essence or soul of the whole cosmos. Okay? So Brahman would be, if you wanted to call it God, although Hindus would not think of it in those terms, but that basically is the one being, the ultimate reality is Brahman. And Atman is Brahman, which means that every person collectively is God. That's what that means. God is the one infinite, impersonal, ultimate reality. God is the universe. God is all that exists. And if anything that is not God appears to exist, it is called Maya, which means it's an illusion. It's a reality. So if there's anything that appears to exist that's not Brahman, then it's Maya. It's an illusion. Brahman is real, but the world in which we live is not. We live in an illusory world, like a mirage. It appears in our consciousness because of our minds, because of our senses. And since we totally depend on our senses and our mind to interpret the world around us, we cannot truly perceive Brahman, the ultimate reality, because it's hidden behind this illusion of a world. Am I scrambling your brain?
Basically, we live in the Matrix.
Yes. Yes. That's exactly right. Our reality is not found in our separateness as individuals. Now, as Westerners, we're very individualistic, right? And we see our worth and our value. You know, we would say there's never been anybody quite like you. Nobody has your fingerprint. We really value our individuality, our separateness. But that's not where reality is found in Eastern thinking. It's found in our oneness, not just with each other in some sort of like a unity way, but our oneness with Brahman. We are Brahman. Brahman is one. Again, in the Christian worldview, it's all about distinctions. Think about it. God is not his creation, and his creation is not God, right? That's what we believe. Okay? We, created by God in his image, are also not the same as the rest of creation, right? There's a distinction between people and the rest of creation. We're the crown of creation. We're the only ones made in God's image, but we are not God. So there's distinctions in the Christian worldview, but those distinctions don't exist in Hindu thought. And in the East, knowing reality, to know reality is to pass beyond any distinctions to realize the oneness of all being. We are all one. One Swami described it this way: everything actually is God, and that nothing whatsoever exists but the divine. The entire universe is his body, and all things are his forms. But if that's true, how do they account for the human experience that we do perceive distinctions, right? I mean, this line of thinking doesn't quite match up with our experience in life, does it? We can't live without acknowledging the distinctions, that you're not me and I'm not you. And I'm not this microphone, right? I mean, we live that way. So why do we fail to realize this oneness with the cosmos? Well, that brings us to the next part. Some things are more one than other things. Don't even try to wrap your mind around this one. It's not possible. This is beyond cryptic. Basically, they say that reality is a hierarchy of illusions, like a magic show, like a David Copperfield show. It's just a hierarchy of illusions. And so some things are closer than others at being one with the one, with Brahman. And therefore, they are more real than other things. And the hierarchy looks like this. First, you have mineral. And in today's world, we'd say any simple matter, any material things. That's mineral. And that's the least real. So this styrofoam cup, this computer, the chair you're sitting on are the least real, most illusionary things. But then it's vegetable. Because vegetable plant life is alive. So it's a little bit closer to oneness with Brahman. Then animal. Because animals can think and they're just a higher life form. And then humans. Humans are the highest, most real of all of the universe. And even among humans, there's a hierarchy. Some humans are more one than other humans. And of course, the highest, most purest being of humans are the gurus, the enlightened ones. They're the ones that are closest with Brahman. And true being itself, to really be in a full sense, is to be united with the one, with the ultimate reality, Brahman. And so all that is not the one, all that is not Brahman, is not really anything. And the goal is to become one with the one and disregard everything else as unreal, even your own thoughts, even your own emotions to be disregarded as unreal. But how does one do this? Because it all seems pretty nonsensical and impossible. Well, they say that many, if not all, roads lead to the one. Okay? There is no one true path from Maya, from the illusionary, to Brahman. There are endless paths. And the point, the goal isn't that we have to be on the same path together, traveling the same way. We just have to be heading the right direction on our own path. You think of it like a mountain, and Brahman is at the top of the mountain. And all trails, all paths lead to the top of the mountain. Doesn't matter what path you're on or where you're on your path, as long as you're heading to the top of the mountain. And again, doctrine doesn't matter. There are no dogmatic beliefs. It's not about your belief, it's about your technique. Technique is everything. One famous Swami said, "Do not argue about doctrines and religions. There's only one. All rivers flow to the ocean. Flow, and let others flow too, man." Doesn't that sound like hippie talk? Just flow, dude. Just get in the flow. I mean, that's exactly it. So all religions really just lead to the same place, oneness with the cosmos. Now, the techniques by which you flow to the ocean and let others flow are things like mantras, right? They chant these mantras. They'll say the same word or the same sound over and over and over again. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Then there's the mandalas. You guys ever see the little mandala coloring books, the mandalas? They're really interesting, but a mandala is a circular image that's very ornate, very intricately detailed, and it symbolizes the totality of reality, and you stare into it. You meditate on that. So one is sort of an auditory, one is a visual, but these are ways that you meditate. And all these techniques require silence and solitude. And they're all meaningless by design. They have no content. A mandala is not a picture of anything. The chants don't mean anything because you're not trying to convey information. You're just trying to tune into the vibes of the cosmos. You feel me? I feel you, dude. Send me some positive vibes. Everybody say that? That's what that is. You're vibing with the cosmos. And that's the way to salvation. Now, when you think of a mantra that a Hindu or Buddhist might say, what comes to mind? Om, right? Om, that's right. And really, Om is the first word in the phrase, and I'm not going to pronounce this right. Om, Mani, Padme, Hum. And it has no meaning. It has no translation because those words absolutely mean nothing. The Maharishi Mahesh Yogi explains that the Om is the sustainer of life, the beginning and end of all creation, that hum, which is the first silent sound, first silent wave that starts from that silent ocean of unmanifested life. So to chant Om is not to try to communicate any idea whatsoever, because it can mean anything and everything at the same time, which means it means nothing. It means nothing. And that's the goal. Because the goal is to move beyond distinctions and into this oneness of reality. So to realize one's oneness with the cosmos is to pass beyond personality. So they would say about humanity that in our essence, in our truest, fullest being, we're impersonal. You and I are impersonal. Now, in theistic worldview, one of the key characteristics of God is that God is a personality, right? He has a personality. self-awareness, self-consciousness. He's got character qualities. He's got will. He can act. He's got self-determination. He has personality. And as beings created in his image, we have personality. So in a theistic worldview, personality is important. It's supreme. It means we have self-consciousness and self-determinacy. We have infinite worth and value. But the problem for Eastern thinking is personality involves duality. Now remember what this is called. Eastern pantheistic monism. The opposite of monism is dualism. Okay? Monism means there's only one being. Dualism means there's two or more beings. Okay? So to have personality is to acknowledge a duality, right? If I'm a thinker, I must have a thought, right? If I know something, there must be something that I know. That suggests two things. There's an object and a subject. There's me and there's you. There's creator and there's creation. The universe is complex. That's not what monism says. Monism says, no, the universe is simple. It's one. It's one being. If Atman is Brahman, then humans are beyond personality. And to realize your being is to abandon any idea of a complex personhood and just enter into the undifferentiated one. Enter into oneness with Brahman. Remember we talked about the idea of the hierarchy of mineral, vegetable, animal, human. There's also a hierarchy of existence. And these are four conditions by which you attain oneness, perfection. Okay? And the hierarchy of existence begins with your waking life. Again, your waking life is the least real. It's the most, secular or whatever. It's the least spiritual part of your life, your waking life. But then there's your dreaming life. So when you sleep and you're dreaming, then it's like you've moved higher in your consciousness. And then if you're in a deep sleep, such that you're not even having thoughts, that's even a higher form of existence and being. And then the ultimate is the awakened life of pure consciousness. So the higher you go in this, the more you are separating from the Maya, from the illusory world, right? From the activities of ordinary daily grind kind of life, and you're moving into non-activity. You're moving into non-thought, not conscious. That's the goal. The goal is to be not conscious because, again, thinking requires dualism. Because there's you, and there's your thought, and there's what you're thinking of. That's not monism. There should be no thought and thinker. There should be no subject and object. There should be no self and not self. There should just be the one. Now, this is why Eastern thought often leads to quiet, solitude, inaction, because true being is not doing. True being is not speaking. True being is not even thinking. So, we think about thinking, we think about knowledge. What do they believe about knowledge? To realize one's oneness with the cosmos is to pass beyond knowledge. The principle of non-contradiction does not apply where ultimate reality is concerned. So again, knowledge requires duality. But if Atman is above all distinction and thought, if Atman is ineffable, then to be is to not know. So remember, Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. They would say, I am, therefore I do not think. It's just almost the exact opposite. The argument kind of goes like this. Reality is one, right? That's the monism. Reality is one. But language requires several dualities, speaker and listener, subject and predicate, that kind of stuff. Therefore, language can never convey truth about reality. And that's why Easternism is non-doctrinal. Because no doctrine can be true because all doctrine uses language. Therefore, it cannot be one. So they focus on what is useful. Not what is true, but what is helpful in achieving oneness with Brahman. And something can be useful in achieving that oneness, even if it's a lie. But of course, if there is no truth, then there are no lies, right? All they care about is technique, not truth. What is useful? Right, what about ethics? They say to realize one's oneness with the cosmos is to pass beyond good and evil. So we've passed beyond personality. We've passed beyond true and false. We pass beyond good and evil, right and wrong. Because since the cosmos is one, the cosmos is perfect at every moment. Everything that happens in the cosmos is what is supposed to happen. Now, this is a major Achilles heel in this worldview because you know what most people tend toward? Naturally, most people tend toward morality. Most people tend toward living by some idea of what's right and wrong. Even those who say they don't. Even those who would believe this and would deny that. Even postmodernism that denies any kind of absolute truth will still talk about justice and talk about doing the right thing and being on the right side of history. Well, how can you say there's a right side of history if there's no absolute truth? If we all set our own standards. So this is one of the major flaws with all these other worldviews is that people tend toward some kind of morality. Now, for Easterners, that expresses itself in the idea of karma. Now, karma is the idea that your present fate, whether that's pleasure or pain, whether you're a millionaire or you're a peasant or whatever, or you're a flea on a dog, whatever you are, it's the result of your past action in a former existence. And this, of course, is based on the idea of reincarnation, which comes from this general principle that nothing that is real, nothing that is part of Brahman, ever really ceases to exist. Right? Atman, your soul, your essence, Atman is Brahman. So if your soul is Brahman, then your soul can never cease to be a soul. Your soul must always exist. And so all souls are eternally on a journey back to the one. Your soul is constantly trying to achieve oneness with Brahman. If you don't accomplish it in this life, your soul will keep trying in the next life, and in the next life, and in the next life, until you reach oneness with Brahman, or until your soul reaches oneness with Brahman. But if karma is the equivalent idea to you reap what you sow, then it implies there's an idea of sin. Right? If there's karma, then there must be things that you do that are bad. There must be things you do that are wrong. But if there's no personal God that you're sinning against, then who can absolve you of your sin? To whom do you turn for forgiveness? Who can cancel your debt? Nobody. There's no need for confession. There's no need for repentance. Instead, your sin has to be worked out through karma. But doesn't this still lean towards the idea of a moral universe, right? That people should do good. If they don't do good, they're going to reap the consequences. So how do these pantheistic monists get out of this? Well, first, the basis for doing good is not for the sake of good being done. It's not even to benefit other people. That's not why you do good things. Because karma says that every soul must suffer for its past sin. And that's how you work your way towards Brahman. So if you're a homeless person on the side of the road, and I help you, and I say, you know what, I'm going to find a place for you to live. I'm going to help you get a job. I'm going to make sure you have 3 square meals every day. If I am helping alleviate your suffering, all I'm doing is postponing your suffering that you're still going to have to suffer later. So if you believe in karma, there's no reason to help anybody except to do good for yourself. So karma is all about helping yourself. I'm going to do good for you, knowing full well that it might mean that you're going to have to suffer another lifetime of agony and pain. But if I do it good for you, then it will help me to have a better life the next go around. So every good deed is really just an exchange. Nothing is done selflessly. And second, all actions are just part of this world of illusion, right? Just like true and false, the distinction between good and evil fade closer you get to oneness. And so everything is good, which means that nothing is good. In the book Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, the character says, everything that exists is good. Death as well as life, sin as well as holiness, wisdom as well as folly. It's all the same. So thinking about death and karma, what do they believe about death? They say that death is the end of your individual personal existence, but it changes nothing essential in one individual's nature. Now, what does that mean? It means that your death is the end of you as a person. That your individual embodiment of the Atman ceases to exist. That's the end of you as a person with a personality. But the Atman, the soul or essence within you, is indestructible and it continues forever. Remember, Atmanism, personal. Think of it like an energy, a force. So you as an individual cease to exist, but the Atman within you is reincarnated and an entirely new person is born. So yes, Hinduism does teach the immortality of the soul, but not the immortality of the person. You, with all of your feelings, hopes, dreams, memories, you cease to exist. Because all that's Maya, your individuality, your personality, all that is an illusion. Only Atman is real. Only Atman is Brahman. So that bears on their thinking of history then. So their idea of history is that to realize your oneness with the one is to pass beyond time. Because time is unreal. And history is just a cycle. They describe it like a river. Time is like a river. And if you're sitting on the bank of a river, it looks like it's moving, doesn't it? It looks like it's going somewhere. You see it pass by you. And they say if you can look at the river from the heavens, you would see it as one, as a wholeness. You'd see it from spring to brook to river to ocean. You would see it from evaporation to condensation to rain back to the spring. You would see that it's all just one cycle and it's all one thing. Time does not exist. The river is. You don't see it moving when you're looking at it from the heavens. So we have the illusion of time because we're sitting on the bank. But if we could see it from the heavens, we'd understand there is no time. History is merely what is produced by the flow of water past a point on the shore. It's an illusion. Now, this is reflected in the fact that Hindu and Buddhist writings have little to no history. You think about the Bible. The majority of the Bible is narrative. It's a story about people and places and events, things that happen. When you read Eastern sacred writings, there are haikus and proverbs and poems and myths and fables and parables. You don't read about real life places and things and stories that happen. You know, we can go to Israel, we can see these places where these things happen. There's nothing like that in Hindu writing or in Buddhist writing. So let's talk about Buddhism. Hinduism says the final reality is Brahman, the one who is being itself, and all other reality. The way to look at it is imagine a flashlight. And you had that flashlight, and all that light's coming out of the flashlight. But as it goes out into a dark room, it spreads out, it scatters, doesn't it? Well, they would say the universe is like that scattered light out there. And where did that scattered universe come from? It came from Brahman. So the world is just this reflection, it's this emanation of Brahman. But Brahman is the one true reality. Well, Buddhism says the final reality is the void. It is nothing. You can't name it, you can't grasp it, that the end goal is to return to the nothing from which we came. Okay? So Hinduism says that each individual is a soul, an Atman, which is an emanation of Brahman, and at death, the soul is reincarnated into another different individual. Well, Buddhists say that each person is a not soul. You're a not soul. Instead, you're an aggregate of past persons, made of what they call existence factors, like your body, your feelings, your perception, your mental formations, your consciousness. You've got these factors of being, And when you die, those factors of being just kind of go into the void. And when somebody else is born, it's like they just kind of coalesce, maybe even with factors from other people, it all coalesces into another person. And it's just this endless, almost like your body. You think about your body, you die, and it deteriorates, your atoms go back into the soil. Let's say somebody plants a garden over your grave. They grow food and they eat that food. And so atoms from you now become part of them. That's kind of the idea here, is that the things that make up who you are get scattered into the ether when you die, and they come back together and they coalesce into somebody else later on. Hindus believe in techniques like mantras that you repeat, and the goal is to introduce a trance-like state so you can attain oneness with Brahman. But Buddhists use techniques to reach a state of realizing their root in non-being. So it's like the opposites. Hinduism is all about the being, the one. Buddhism is about the non-being, the not one, the void. You literally are trying to reach a state of nothingness. That's Buddhism. So with these kinds of worldviews, what kind of core commitments do you have? Well, they vary widely, as you can imagine. But one consistent commitment is this idea that by the elimination of desire, you can achieve salvation. Whether that's to realize your union with the one or the void, both are seeking this idea of pure consciousness. And when I say pure consciousness, when we think of consciousness, we think of thinking, of thought. But to them, pure consciousness is not thinking, it's just being. You're just pure being. You're not even necessarily thinking. Now, both Eastern religions will locate the problem of human suffering in this separateness from the one or the void. We suffer because we live in an illusion. We're chasing mirages, right? You've got these goals and these desires that are just mirages. They're not real. And the way to eliminate suffering is to get rid of those desires, to have no desire, to have no goals. Hindus do this through meditation and mantra. Buddhists do it through the eightfold path, which is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right consciousness. So Buddhism is a little bit more complicated than Hinduism. Now, any questions? Well, I have a question for you. What are some ways that Eastern thought has influenced Western culture? Can you think of any examples?
You have a lot of people meditating.
That's true. Now, let me say this. The Bible talks about meditating, right? Talk about meditating on God's word. But in Jewish and Christian thought, meditation literally means to chew on God's word. The idea is that our meditation is to think. It is to think on and talk to ourselves about what God's word says. That's the opposite of Eastern meditation. Eastern meditation is not thinking. Your mind is supposed to be a blank slate. You're just opening yourself up to the cosmos. You're not supposed to think anything. That's Eastern meditation, is the lack of thought. Whereas Christian and Jewish meditation is to think on the word of God. So they're like exactly the opposite. The people hear Christians talk meditating, oh, really? Yeah. And they think, oh, that's not what Christian meditation is. But yeah, meditation is a big thing. And people even, therapists and counselors will talk about using meditation techniques and stuff to help you overcome, your tobacco habit or whatever. That's another hand over here.
One that I've run into with acquaintances is yoga. There's yoga and then there's Christian yoga.
Right. Yoga definitely comes out of Hinduism and the different forms, that all of that is a part of praying and meditating and that sort of thing. That's not to say that you can't do yoga if you're just doing the motions and the exercises themselves, but you're not doing it in any kind of a spiritual way. You're not doing any mantras, chants. And most, if you go down to the Y and take a yoga class, you don't know what it is. You're stretching, right? You're just stretching your body. That's all you think you're doing. So people will often talk about doing Pilates and different things like that as opposed to traditional yoga. So the Beatles, later in life, bought all into Eastern mysticism. And that's them meeting with the Maharishi Yogi there, and they were all into transcendentalism and Buddhism and Hinduism. They were all interested in that sort of stuff. And George Harrison actually, followed Hare Krishna. He was a Hare Krishna. So this influenced even their songwriting, right? Based on everything we've talked about tonight, just look at the words to the song Imagine. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will be as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger. A brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. Does that not sound like a lot of what we talked about tonight? No distinctions, no heaven and hell, right? No hungry and no poor, no rich, no countries, no distinctions. We all just will be like a dreamer dreaming, and the world will be just as one. This was all heavily influenced by Eastern pantheistic monism. What about movies like Star Wars? I love Star Wars, but the whole idea of the Jedi and the Force, you think about, Obi-Wan Kenobi tells Luke, don't trust your senses, just trust the Force. Almost like don't think, don't just be in the Force, and it will guide you, and you'll know what to do. I mean, all of that is very influenced by Eastern ways of thinking, and you even see in the movie The Last Jedi, Luke is even sitting in this very traditional Hindu pose with the legs crossed and all of that kind of floating in midair. So all of that is very influenced by Eastern ways of thinking, as is the Matrix movies. Julia said that, the Matrix movies, if you're familiar with those movies, the idea is the world isn't real. It's computer programmed. And the enlightened people are the ones who can see that the world isn't real. And they can leave the illusory world, the Maya, and go into the real world. And it's famously depicted by Morpheus offering Neo the red pill or the blue pill, right? And depending on which pill he takes will be whether his eyes are open and he sees reality for what it really is. So the Matrix movies were groundbreaking movies as far as action, sci-fi, special effects, but they are heavily influenced by Eastern pantheistic monism. As are these two Christopher Nolan movies. And again, I love these movies. They're great movies. The movie Inception is this idea that you can go deeper into these dream states with people and they become like their reality. And it just is all this mind-bending, reality-bending kind of existence. Interstellar, it is kind of that idea that all of existence is sort of like this flowing river. And if you can get beyond it, you can reach this place where you can kind of look into these different parts of time. And it's just this idea that everything is one and everything is connected. And so these sci-fi movies oftentimes, and that seems almost contradictory, science fiction, what in the world could it have in common with Eastern mysticism? But they found a very successful blending of that. So, and again, there's nothing wrong with watching these movies so long as you understand where they're coming from, what that worldview is, and you understand that, and that none of that's real. The dream, I'm sorry, the dream is not real. So, and of course, we've talked about mandalas, we've talked about yoga, we've talked about, and then just Zen, we talk about Zen and feng shui, these kinds of ideas, and they even have like these retreat centers, these wellness centers that are all based in Zen, Buddhism, and all of these ways of thinking. And it also influences us through our celebrities. You'd be shocked at how many, well, maybe you wouldn't be, how many Hollywood celebrities are Buddhist and Hindu. Jennifer Aniston's a Buddhist. Richard Gere is a, he's a Hindu. Julia Roberts is Hindu. And then there's the Dalai Lama. And everybody quotes the Dalai Lama all the time. And I have a picture of the Dalai Lama. What politician has to have his picture of the Dalai Lama?
But is it real?
Say again?
But is it real when they get the picture?
Oh, no, it's not real. Pictures are not real in any sense of right, so that's Eastern pantheistic monism. Any final questions on that?